Welcome, kiddos, to the Father's Day Meat and Potatoes class. If you missed the cocktail class, I am rocking my dad attire. Got like my phone pouch, my super cool watch. Obviously, don't want to lose my shades. But we're cooking meat and potatoes because, I mean, you can't go wrong with meat and potatoes. But meat and potatoes are only made better by cheese and beer. So we're just going to put all of those together in one trifecta. Before we start, I had a couple of people message me in between my cocktail class and the cooking class, so I'm going to just address the questions real quick. But these classes are entirely free. I just do this to try and stay sane while I am unemployed on this COVID train we're all on. Tips are appreciated, but absolutely not mandatory. If you need that information, I will try and repost it later. I have accounts on like all the big ones like Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App, I think. But yeah, we're just gonna cook some really awesome stuff today. If you missed the cocktail class, the video is on the Pandemic Pen Up Happy Hour page on Facebook and the Underground Cooking Club. All of the cocktails would go really good with what we're about to make. But today, for the cooking class, we're gonna be doing three things. We're gonna do a beer cheese dip, which is so good. We're gonna do salt crusted mini potatoes, which is probably my favorite way ever to make baby potatoes. And then we're gonna make some Southwestern skewers with some beef. So first things first, we're gonna start the potatoes because they have to simmer and cook and they're a tougher vegetable. They take a little bit more time. So we're gonna do that first. So for the recipe, very, very simple. You need 3 ingredients: salt, potatoes, and water. So the key ingredient in this though is going to be the salt. I have kosher salt. It's slightly different in texture from other kinds of salt. It's also not iodized like other salts. You could do this with regular salt. The end result's just going to be a little bit different. Kosher salt's definitely the best. So if you have 2 pounds of potatoes, which is usually one of these little baggies, you're going to need a half cup of salt. If you have a pound, then you'll need a quarter cup of salt, and so forth. You do the math. And then water is going to vary. It's about 2 to 3 cups of water. So I have a medium-sized saucepan that I have about 2 cups of water in right now. I'm going to just pour all of these potatoes in there. It's really this simple. I love this. My whole thought process with Father's Day cooking is most of the dads I know don't like to spend all day cooking. They like to spend all day telling bad, cheesy jokes, watching sports, annoying the heck out of their family members and wives, and pretending that they didn't hear things that they were supposed to do chore-wise. So making the cooking part simple. That way, if you're a dad and you're cooking, then it doesn't take up a lot of time. Or if you're cooking for your dad, you don't have to use a lot of time either, and you can just bond over eating this. So I have potatoes and water. I'm going to show you guys the water level. It's not like flush with the potatoes. It's a little bit lower, but that's totally okay. They don't have to be fully covered in water. And then water, potatoes, put the salt directly in there. Just right there. And then I'm going to go put this over a medium to high heat. We're going to bring it to a boil. Okay, so in the time that it's going to boil, we're going to be doing some other things. So I'm not going to move the camera along with me yet. But we're going to bring it to a boil. And if yours comes to a boil before mine does, then all you want to do is turn it down to a low simmer. So 3 ingredients, super easy. Potatoes, water, salt. Boil, yes, Ms. Elgin.
Are you covering the pan at all during this?
I'm not. Very good question. We are going to bring this to a boil uncovered. The reason these potatoes are called salt crusted potatoes, y'all will see at the end of the cooking process, they end up with this really thin, salty film all over the potato, so they're perfectly seasoned. But to be able to do that, we have to evaporate all the water, which is much easier without a lid on our pot. So just as you see it here, we're gonna go put it on to boil, okay? All right, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So what we're gonna do next is our Southwestern Skewers. And I did a little thing that I like to do as a chef, which is pre-measure all of my ingredients in what looks like a beautiful spice palette, because I'm a nerd. But what we have here, just so you can follow along, I'll try to tilt the plate without really mixing all of the spices, but if you're following along and want to write down the recipe, it's going to be 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of paprika. I'm using smoked paprika. It's kind of like my kink, if you will. I just love smoked paprika. I like sweet paprika as well, but smoked paprika is my absolute favorite. And I'm using a traditional Spanish paprika, not just like a McCormick, but you can use any paprika, it's fine. So 1 teaspoon each of sugar, chili powder, paprika. Then we're going to do 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano as well. If you don't have dried oregano and for some reason in your house you have ground oregano, then you want to use a 1/2 teaspoon to about a 3/4 teaspoon, just because you're getting a lot more in your spoon because it's a different texture. And then all of the following ingredients are going to be in a 1/2 teaspoon format. So we have a 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper, and this is fresh packed. I grind mine by hand all the time. It just has a much better flavor, lasts a lot longer. If you buy the pre-ground black pepper, after a couple months, it just tastes like dust. It has no flavor whatsoever. So I highly recommend always crack your pepper in the moment, or if you don't want to do it by hand, you can get one of those little electric pepper cracks. Yes, Jack. Let's see, unmute yourself. What's going on?
How much oregano?
That's going to be 1 teaspoon.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so the recipe is all of the ingredients are either 1 teaspoon or 1/2 teaspoon. So the 1 teaspoon, just to repeat, are going to be 1 teaspoon sugar, 1 teaspoon chili powder, 1 teaspoon paprika, 1 teaspoon garlic powder, 1 teaspoon dried oregano. And then on our 1/2 teaspoon department, we're going to have a 1/2 teaspoon of cayenne, 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper, 1/2 teaspoon of cumin, ground cumin, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of ground coriander. If you have the seeds instead of the ground and you have a spice grinder or a coffee grinder, do that. Beautiful. If you don't, you can definitely put them in a mortar and pestle. If you don't have one of those, but you have cocktail ingredients because you like to drink, then you can use a muddler and a bowl. And if not, just try to fine chop them as much as possible and then mix them in the same amount. Not a big deal.
And it's half a teaspoon of smoked paprika, right?
The paprika is going to be 1 teaspoon.
Got it. Thank you.
So I like this as is, right? All of these ingredients as is. But if you try this and you want to kind of play around with just these ingredients before adding new ones or substituting them, you could toast some of these spices, especially the ground coriander, the ground cumin. It'll definitely give a different depth of flavor to the spice mix. You could sub out the oregano for different dried herbs that you prefer. If you're not a big oregano fan, you can swap out the white sugar for any variety of other sugars, coconut sugar, brown sugar. Just don't use artificial sugars like stevia or anything like that because the ratios would be different. So if you need that, for whatever diet you're on, then reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to give you the proper ratios. But we have all of our spice ingredients. And very simply, I'm going to just pour these all into this bowl here. And I'm doing this in a bowl just so you guys can see it. I've got a fork, just kind of mixing all of my spices together. My favorite way to do this, though, is to put it in a giant Ziploc bag and basically shake and bake my meat. I'm not going to bake it. I just like saying shake and bake. I love that movie, Talladega Nights. It makes me laugh all the time. So I'm going to mix all of our spices here. Our potatoes are still not boiling, but I don't want y'all to forget about them. Yeah, as you can see, you just kind of want to mix it until it looks like it's pretty uniform and everything's fairly well mixed. Now this spice mix here, as is Southwestern Spice Blend. Do this in larger quantities if you want. Put it in a jar, keep it in your spice cabinet. It's great on a lot of things. Great on chicken, great on seasoning taco meats. If you like to do like pulled pork in a slow cooker, great option. Also makes a really interesting rim on a lot of different cocktails, maybe amp up your Bloody Mary on the weekends. But we're gonna be using cubed sirloin. So I have about 1.5 pounds here that I pre-cut into these nice little squares that are skewer size. Now, if you don't want to make skewers for the cheese and you just want, I don't know, maybe you want to just make a sirloin steak and put cheese sauce on it. I'm totally okay with that. So if you want to do that, don't cube up your cheese, but season it. Now, the important thing to realize about this seasoning mix, if you didn't already, there's no salt in it. The reason I do that is so that I can pre-season these and let them pretty much marinate for however long I want, and then I salt them right before I cook them. That way, none of the extra moisture is drawn out from the chemical process that happens when salt hits protein and tries to extract all that water. So we're just gonna put all of this in here. I'm gonna toss these around in the spice mix. The ratios that I gave you is pretty much what you would need for about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of meat. Just depends on how coated you like them. I like my meat to be fairly coated when I do this spice recipe mix. That way when I put them on a grill or I do it in a skillet like we're gonna do here in a little bit, they end up having a little bit of a blackened effect. If you've ever had like blackened chicken or blackened beef or pork, the Louisiana type of thing they do a lot. I like them nice and covered. Allows them to get like a nice little char when you get cooking. Lost it. Perfect timing because I want to show them to you anyway. But as you can tell, they're really nicely coated. The lighting in here is terrible today, guys. I'm sorry. The sun doesn't like me. But yeah, spices everywhere. And so if you wanted to, say you're prepping ahead of time because you're gonna have a barbecue, have some buddies over, or you know, you maybe do your prep in the morning so you don't have to cook everything at night. You can pretty much season these like this and then just keep them in your fridge 12 hours, 24 hours. I wouldn't do more than 24 just because some of those spicy notes will penetrate a little too deep and then you won't be able to taste the meat. It'll taste more like seasoning than meat, whereas we want it to taste like meat with seasoning. But again, we don't salt it until we're going to cook it. So we have this mixed up. And then what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go wash this hand because it's my spice hand. And then we're going to make a couple skewers. I'm only going to be making 2 so that y'all can see them while we're doing the class. I'm going to put the rest of them on skewers that I have soaking in water because I'm going to grill the rest of them later when I have dinner. So that's a really good pro tip. If you are making skewers to put on your grill, make sure you soak them in water and that way they won't burn and break off when you have them on your grill. So I'll be right back. Go wash my spice. All right, guys, we're gonna take a quick field trip before I put these skewers up so you guys can see where our potatoes are doing. It's something important I want to share. So, right here, these are the potatoes. As you can see, they're steaming and boiling. I'm hoping that this will translate onto the screen. But there is a slight salty residue on the rim of my pan. I think you can see it there. And that's a good thing. That's what we're looking for. So we have these on. They're boiling. We're going to drop them down to a simmer. And we're going to come back to them in about 10 minutes or so. But every so often, we just want to come around, stir them up. Because again, the water is not flush with the potatoes. As you can see, they're kind of a little bit over the water line. So we just want to make sure that they're all cooking evenly. So we got them like that. We're going to go back to our skewers. Set you guys back right there. Put my Venmo back up there just in case anybody has the ability to tip. But all right. back to our regularly scheduled programming. Whoa. All right. So potatoes are boiling. We're gonna set a timer. We're gonna check them in about 10 minutes. Sorry, not boiling, they're on a simmer. So, Jack, I'm not sure where your potatoes are, but my potatoes are already boiling, so I dropped them to a simmer.
Mine are not boiling yet because I put them on the lowest burner because I wanted to have the fry pan on the front burner, so.
Okay, so just put them as high as possible on that
Oh, yeah.
burner.
Yep.
All right, cool. So once they do get to that boil, you do want to drop them to a simmer and then set a timer for 10 minutes to come in and check on them. You'll see me do it first, which is kind of a good
Okay.
thing. You'll be able to like do yours just a little bit delayed behind me. So I'm going to set up about 2 skewers. I'm going to put 3 little meat cubes on each one of these skewers. Like I said, I'm going to be making other skewers later. So these are just kind of to demonstrate how these are going to turn out. We're going to be making these for the evening class in a regular cast iron skillet. The ones I'm going to be making later today are definitely going to be on the grill. So if you're making these in a skillet, you don't have to pre-soak the skewers. You can just use regular, I'm using bamboo skewers. No special treatment whatsoever. All right. So got all that right there. So I've got 2 skewers ready. I'm gonna put this over here on my back burner. Keeping an eye on the potatoes. Remember, every soften every 3 to 4 minutes. Once they are at that simmer, we want to give them a stir. So these ones have been on for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes since we set the timer, so they've still got a little ways to go. So while we're waiting on that, I'm going to walk you guys through what we're going to need for our beer cheese. And our beer cheese, our texture is going to be similar to a fondue. So I love beer cheese. It is so flexible. There are so many different ways to season it and flavor it. And it's one of my favorite things. And you can use it for everything, right? It's great as a fondue. It's great as a sauce. If you have any left over and then say you make baked potatoes tomorrow, great in baked potatoes. Also great in like scrambled eggs or on breakfast tacos or just in a spoon in your mouth because it's beer cheese and it's delicious. So for the beer cheese we're doing today, I'm going to teach you the way I make it and kind of give you some wiggle room in case y'all don't have the exact same cheese. And then would love to hear about modifications that y'all are going to be making at your own. So you're going to need 2 tablespoons of butter. Now, if you've never noticed before, when you buy butter, usually the wrapper around your butter stick will tell you how many tablespoons. It usually has like a little line. So I'll show you on mine. This one I've already cut, but it has these little lines here like a ruler, and each one of these little squares is a tablespoon. So I'm going to use 2 tablespoons, just so you know. Usually 1 stick of butter is 8 tablespoons. So 2 tablespoons of butter and 2 tablespoons of flour. So 2 tablespoons of butter. I have 2 tablespoons of flour, and you can tell there's something else in there. I've also measured a half teaspoon of paprika in with my flour. And the reason I do that is because I already know exactly how much I like in my beer cheese. And it's much easier to incorporate a dry ingredient if it's with another dry ingredient. So we're going to be making something called a roux here in a minute, which is a very French technique where you melt some butter and stir in some dry ingredients and stir in some ingredients to make sauce. So it's a much easier way to incorporate it with flour. If you forget this step, you can season it at the end, just sprinkle it in a little bit at a time so it doesn't clump. So 2 tablespoons butter, 2 tablespoons of flour, and I have a half a teaspoon of smoked paprika because we've already talked about this. I like the smoke. I'm gonna go stir those potatoes real quick. reminder, if you didn't catch that on the last time, when you're cooking these potatoes, there's gonna be this like white residue, almost like if it's covered in like calcium or something on the insides of your pot. And that's just the salt cooking off. Don't freak out. Taught this recipe to a couple people and they thought they were ruining their pot, so they just kind of poured everything out and spazzed. Don't do that. It cleans off very easily with a sponge and some water. It's not going to stain your pot or make any issues for you whatsoever. So, other ingredients, we have 1 cup of milk. I'm using whole milk. It definitely tastes better that way just because that fat helps the sauce be nice and creamy. If you're using a reduced fat milk, just keep an eye on that texture. You might need to add a little bit more thickener or a little more cheese in the end, but we're gonna do 1 cup of whole milk. I also have this combination that looks really, really weird in this bowl. And this is 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce and 1.5 teaspoons of Dijon mustard. Stone ground mustard is really good. If you have spicy mustard, brown mustard, they're all good, but just use some mustard. It's not gonna taste like mustard. It's just like adding a little bit of flavor. What's up, Jack?
So we haven't started cooking anything. You haven't made the roux yet. Just add the milk and okay.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know what all my ingredients are and how they're measured out. Stirring up the potatoes. What was the question? Oh, you good? All right. So just laid out the ingredients right now. We're not starting anything. I'm gonna take it all over to the stove as soon as we do start. We're obviously using a very important ingredient, beer. So I got this beer. I'm using a Weizenbach. So this is an amber wheat ale. So it's like a dark wheat beer, which is not a very common beer. This is a local Texas beer. So there's different beers you can use for this. The most classic would be a Pilsner, a lighter beer. And the reason for that is just because it adds a nice note to the cheese. It just kind of amplifies the cheese, if you will. But if you want to step out of the spectrum of just using it as a enhancer, you can definitely use it as a flavoring agent. So my personal preference is across the board. I want to say my favorite one I've ever done is with Newcastle Brown, which is a pretty standard beer. If you use darker beers, it brings out like a nice nuttiness. It enhances a light bitterness, not in a bad way though. LG saying she used to use Roux Hazelnut Brown, beautiful beer, absolutely beautiful. Also, interesting beer to use is, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it's an oatmeal brown ale. And just that extra grain that's added into that beer makes it really nice. I've used IPAs, I've used light beers, I've used Hefeweizens, which this is a type of Weizen. They're also really nice. They just do different things. And it's kind of hard to really tell you exactly what the beer is going to do because that also depends on your cheese selection. So what I like to tell people is pick 1 cheese, pick 1 beer, and then run with it. Taste it, see how you like it. And then if you really like the cheese flavor but thought like the beer made it too bitter or maybe too herbal, then switch up the beer, keep the cheese. Or if you really liked what the beer did, keep the beer, switch up the cheese. I've played around with this recipe a ton, so I'm using more than 1 cheese. I'm using 3. But if you're a first timer, don't get ahead of yourself. 1 and 1 is the way to go. So they've been on for about 8 minutes. I'm going to give them 1 more stir. As far as beer goes, the most important part of this recipe is as follows. You're going to need a half of a beer. You want to try and open it with 1 hand. You can keep your finger gun handy just in case you need it. You're going to need a half a cup of beer. I'm going to go ahead and measure it out. There's a very important rule that most professionals like to use. We don't always share this, but I'm going to share it with y'all today because it's Father's Day. I thought I'd do something nice for you. But every time the recipe gets a drink, so does the chef. Cheers. How you keep things even. However, if you're cooking for a lot of people, you either end up with a really good recipe and a really happy chef, or you end up with a really bad recipe and a chef that doesn't give a damn. All right, cocoa with some beer. So, let me tell you, I want to tell you about my cheeses, but I have a feeling our timer is going to go off ahead of time. So, I'm going to get my grater. Timer. So we're going to come back to the cheese, but I have a grater ready and my fresh cheeses. We're going to go check on those potatoes. I can show you what we need to be doing. So you're going to need either a fork or a skewer to test out your potatoes. As you can tell, the water's still pretty much at a very similar level. And you'll notice sometimes the potatoes on top will look like they're starting to dry out. That's good. What we're going to do is we're going to pick one potato and we're going to test it and see how tender it is. It's pretty tender. It's not working like butter. So what you want to do here is all the salt is on the bottom. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pour off a lot of this water. I'm going to pour off about a half of the water that I see in here, but really slowly trying to make sure that the salt stays on the bottom. Okay? And I would turn you guys to see this, but it's just going to steam up the entire screen. So you're just going to have to trust me. Pouring off some water here. And then, very careful not to pour out your potatoes as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put this on a medium high. So like I was saying, sometimes the potato will look like it's drying out. See how it's half wet, half dry? That's a good thing. So we're going to put it on a medium high. There is about maybe a ½ inch of water left in there. It's not a whole lot. As you can tell on the camera, I can't see it anymore. This is that salt residue I was talking about, guys. So what we're doing here, we're going to keep an eye on it because we're going to go back and grate our cheese. But we're stirring them around and we're going to evaporate the water that's left on there and we're going to stir them so they get coated in the salt residue. As soon as your water gets almost fully evaporated, you want to keep a really tight eye on this because you don't want to burn your potatoes and you don't want to burn your salt because that'll make it taste funny. So these are bubbling quite happily. Keep an eye on that over here. We're going to grate some cheese in the meantime. All right. So the important part about beer cheese is if you bought pre-grated cheese, totally okay. However, pre-grated cheese is usually treated with an anti-caking agent, which can be anything from like cornstarch to flour to any other type of humidity absorbing powder. And those things will definitely make your beer cheese thicker quicker because it's adding a thickening agent. Like anti-caking agents also thicken things. So I like to always grate my cheese fresh. It also helps it be meltier because the ingredients that are making the sauce don't have to penetrate the anti-caking agent to be able to really get to your cheese. So let's shout out to Miss Sarah Marie and my mom and probably my stepdad that I think they're watching on Facebook. But we have 3 of my favorite cheeses today. And I say that really loosely. It's not like cheese. I don't discriminate. We kind of went over this earlier in the cocktail class. But I have Gruyere, which is a beautiful fondue cheese. Really, really melty, great flavor. And then talked about how much I like that smoke. Got some smoked Gouda. It's also really nice. Put that over here. And then, icing on the cake, I'm absolutely in love with this aged white Irish cheddar. I'm going to put a little bit of that in there. So look at that beautiful cheese stack. It's really hard to control myself and not just eat it. Done that before. I had an entire block of aged white cheddar and made it shaped like Texas with your mouth. All right, we'll go check on these potatoes. All right, give those a quick stir. Just be really careful when you are doing that because remember, they are already tender. I saw the fork and went through it like butter. So if you stir them a little too aggressively, you're going to start breaking up the potato. We don't want to do that. We're not trying to make mashed potatoes. We're trying to make salt crusted baby potatoes. So in the meantime, we're going to grate our cheese. Peel this. So what you need for this recipe is about 8 ounces. You can use a little bit more if you want to. I'm using about 10 ounces, but 8 is like your minimum. So I'm gonna feel this Gouda real quick. Oh, my kitchen smells so amazing right now. I don't know if it's just me, but I love.
Jack's cheese.
Do what?
Jack has cheese.
Yeah. What cheese do you have, Jack?
Gruyere.
Oh, yes. Gruyere is such a good cheese. It's so,
Yep.
I feel like it gets overlooked because not enough people know about it, honestly. I think that's the problem.
I actually had to go to 3. So you listed it as 1 and I went, oh my God, this is going to be awesome. So I went to 3 different stores looking for it.
That's commitment, guys. That's commitment. All right. So I'm going to grate these on the smaller of my grater just because they melt faster if they're smaller pieces. So I'm going to grate this whole thing. And this is my new grater, and I'm absolutely in love with it because it has this nifty little Tupperware that hooks into the bottom. I feel like such a housewife or a house dad. I'm a house dad today. House dad. Sorry about that. I feel like a house dad. Loving my gadgets. Over here, putting in work, grating cheese. I'm like, sometimes you have all these distractors. I like to put in a little pile, and I like to call those my mouth pile because I'm not going to put those in with the rest of the cheese. I'm going to eat it. Just don't tell anybody because then they get mad they didn't get the same amount of cheese. Well, great. So I'm grating my smoked Gouda. And you can really make beer cheese with any cheese. You can use straight cheddar. You could do Swiss. You can do unsmoked Gouda. You can do, you definitely don't want to do any soft cheeses, like no brie, no camembert, none of those. They're a little too soft and they get really funky. You could use funky cheeses such as like blue cheese or Roquefort, but those are going to have a much harder time pairing with the beer. So just be careful. Proceed with caution if you choose a funky cheese.
Chandler, I found out something very interesting. So there's a wine tasting group on Wednesday, and we had like the first wine tasting dinner in 3 months last Wednesday.
Huh?
Have you ever had the wine called Skaya from Northern Italy?
Does not ring a bell.
So what's distinctive about it is it has instead of having a cork, it's got a glass stopper.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So apparently Skaya, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but essentially there's both a Bianco and a Rosso, but the Bianco and the Rosso, the name, it comes from the fact that Skaya is when you carve up Parmesan, crumbs that fall away in Italian are Skaya. And
I love that.
They looked at the dirt when they were buying the vineyard and went, this is Skaya. And they named the whole vineyard.
So I guess I'm not going to call it mouth cheese anymore. Skaya sounds way more classy.
I'm going to send you a picture of the label. And I've been drinking the Bianco for years, but I tried the Rosso the other night, not only at the wine tasting dinner, but then coincidentally, I went into to Tamura's and they had some, actually I went to Safeway and they had some. And so I got another bottle of the Rosso and it was tremendous. It was great.
I'll have to keep an eye out. Maybe they have it here. I'm not sure.
I'll send you a picture, okay?
Please do. And that's a really good point that you bring up about wine. If we do have any dads out there that are more wine drinkers than beer drinkers, you can make this absolute same recipe with wine. And totally different ballpark. There's just as many wines as there are beers. There's so many grapes, so many countries. The craft beer scene has gotten so large that people forget how varied wine is. And you can make this with red wine, you can make it with white wine. I definitely recommend starting with white wines, just because they have flavor profiles that are a little easier to understand. Most of the time, they tend to be a little less complex, and a little less full bodied, but it just also depends on what wine you get. So if, say you're really into Chardonnay, definitely try that. You try whatever wine you like in the same quantities, and you can do that. If you are a hard liquor person, I love whiskey. I made whiskey cheese and beer cheese. They're both really good. However, it's almost painful to pour half a cup of whiskey into my cheese. So usually, at least in my house, we use the cheaper whiskeys for the beer cheese, or the whiskey cheese in that case, and then we drink the expensive ones. But hey, if you've got the budget, go all the way on both. All right, so I can hear my potatoes getting low. So I'm gonna go give them a stir again. All right, so I'm gonna try and figure out how to show you guys this on camera. So there's almost no water left in this pot, but I think I have to get a small spoon. When I say I can hear it get low, the water, almost a lot of it, but you'll end up with this residue. I'll try and take a picture of this and then just post it on the page later. But this is a salt residue left on the bottom of the pot. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And as you can see, the potatoes look lightly white, and then you see all the salt around the pot. This is all good. This means you've done a good job. So once the bottom of the pot, let me see if I can uncover some of that so you guys can see. I don't know if y'all can see right here, but this is a salt layer. Once you get here, you're good. You want to just kind of let these sit for a minute and cool a little bit on the stove to let that salt sit. You can kind of just rotate it around. Let me see if I can find one. It's kind of getting there already. But like, this is a purple potato, and look at that really nice light film of salt. It's beautiful. Absolutely. So we're gonna finish grating our cheese. And then we're gonna go make this beer cheese. And honestly, I know people like to buy grated cheese, really like to be, more convenient, but this is one of those things that grating it by hand is really worth it, just because it ends up with a much better texture because you're not having to use any cheese that's coated in caking ingredients. All right, so Skaya, is that what it was? Let's see, I'm gonna leave my little mouth cheese / Skaya.
Chandler, I will send you a picture of the bottle so you'll know exactly what to buy.
All right, so my cheese Skaya, my multi-cheese Skaya, for the lesser fancy of us, mouth cheese. I'm gonna put it over my corner. I'm gonna come back to it later. And we are gonna go over to the stove, make some beer cheese, guys. What we've all been waiting for. So, I've got, switch these around. Got a small saucepan, and then I'm going to bring all those ingredients we talked about and line them up right next door. So I've got my beer, my mustard, and my Worcestershire. Got my milk, my flour and paprika. I've got my butter. All right, we're going to check in with the Facebook peeps. We're missing so far. It looks like we're doing good. So go ahead and put your butter in your pot. And now roux is a very common technique. You'll see it in a lot of recipes. If you don't know what it is, it's spelled R-O-U-X. And it's basically melting a fat or having a fat that you're going to put a thickening agent, which is most of the time wheat flour. You're going to make a paste, and then you're going to start to dissolve that paste into your liquid, which will be your sauce. This is used for Alfredo sauce, for bechamel, for fondue, for a lot of different things. So it's a really good technique. There's a lot of different grades of roux. You can do them blonde, gold, brown, dark, and that just talks about how far you toast the flour before you add in liquid. But we're just going to do a blonde roux. I'm going to put my butter on low. I'll let that melt. I like to do this with a whisk. If you do end up making this recipe and having issues with it being too chunky, you can always strain it to make it really nice and smooth. But in this case, you will lose a little bit of your cheese. But you know, it's up to you whether you want clumps or cheese. So we're gonna go ahead and start melting our butter in our pot. You don't need a fancy whisk. This is one of these commercial whisks with a little ring on the bottom. You can also just use a spoon. I've done that a lot. Slowly, I acquire all of the tools that I like of my trade. So we're melting that butter. And while we're doing that, I'm going to slowly start heating my cast iron back here. I'm going to put it on real low. I just want to get this slowly hot because when I put those skewers on there, I like to cook my meat anywhere from medium rare to medium. If you like them well done, then definitely you're going to need to cook them a little bit more. You're going to do a sear and then a slower cook. I'm pretty much going to sear them on all sides and then they'll be good to go. So our butter's melting really nicely. We're almost there. And I don't know, I'm one of these people that you have a lot of people tell you don't use salted butter, use unsalted butter. I always use salted butter and then add salt when needed. That's just kind of how I've always done things because I believe if everything has the seasoning that it already needs, you almost rarely, if at all, need to use salt all that much. So our butter's melted. I'm going to take our flour and our paprika, toss that in there, give it a little stir. Paste. You're going to stir it around until all your flour is there. You see there's no more white powder in there. So once your paste is all in there, I'm going to pour in my beer. Slowly whisk. And the reason I pour my beer in first is because beer likes to foam up when you put it on the heat. So this will allow that foam to kind of die down a little bit before I add in the milk. So just whisk, whisk, whisk. It's really important to keep stirring here if you're using a spoon. Just make sure you're looking for all those clumps, getting all the edges of your pan. You're going to get like a smooth, saucy, very liquid texture in there. And once you have that in there, we're going to add our milk. Pretty simple so far, right? So we've got all that mixed together. Give it a nice stir. Let it sit there for a little bit. So what the most, I wouldn't say maybe it is the most important. I think it's a fairly important point. I've had a lot of people make roux or sauces that are based on this. A lot of gravies can be similar where they're based on that, on a flour and a fat, and then you add the liquid. A lot of times people will make them and then tell me, Chandler, it tastes like flour. What I do wrong. You have to let it come to a soft boil because that's what's going to cook off that flour flavor. We want the flour to be a thickening agent. We don't want fondue that tastes like flour. We want it to taste like beer and cheese. We don't want an Alfredo that tastes like flour. We want it to taste like a sauce. So it's very important that we allow this to come to the right temperature, but we have to remember we have a dairy product in here. Those burn very quickly. We have flour, which can thicken very quickly. So every so often, we're just going to make sure we're stirring it around, make sure nothing's sticking on the bottom. Any salt going into this fondue whatsoever. The reason for that, and this is the chef brain, the way we always think is, you need to know what you're using for what. So I know this fondue is going for salted potatoes and heavily seasoned meat. Doesn't need any extra salt because it's going to get it from whatever gets dipped in here. If I was just dipping carrot sticks or like bland potatoes with no seasoning, then I would probably add just a few pinches of salt into this later on. So right now, I'm just gonna let that sit there, come to. Check out those potatoes, guys. Do you see those? Oh my gosh, they look great. So I'm gonna show them to you. They're just so fun and pretty. See if they're close. This cute little salt. The dark ones look a lot better. Let's try those. Salt ones are a lot easier to see. Purple potatoes. They look like fossils. So you'll see there's parts of the potato that look like it's just coated very lightly and other parts where the salt looks caked. So right before you serve these, you can just give them a light dusting with a paper towel and then it'll take off any like excess chunks of salt. But I usually like to serve them like this because like I said, I already know where they're going. So extra salt on here, season the fondue as it's coating the potato. stir this. Everything works together in harmony. So we've got our skillet heating up nicely. Add a little bit of olive oil so we can sear our skewers here in a minute. And so there's a lot of other flavors and seasonings you can do. We talked about different cheeses you can use, different beers you can use, but I use smoked paprika. You might want to use chili powder. If you like it real spicy, you can use cayenne pepper. If you want to do herbs, you could, if you use like one solid cheese, a really good combination, for example, would be a Gruyere or a Swiss, and just stick with one cheese, and then use a lighter beer, such as a Pilsner, even maybe an IPA gives it a little added depth, and then an herb instead of a dried spice. You could use some thyme or some rosemary, or even herbs de Provence if you can get that. And naked person in the back of the screen. Not fully naked, just shirt off. Got a lot of ink. Love it. So what happens when you teach classes in your own house and people don't want to stay in the prisons that you make for them, which are their bedrooms? You give them snacks, you give them drinks.
Did we finally just meet Joe?
Oh no, that was Corey.
That was Corey.
Yeah, Corey's got a lot of ink. Yeah. No, Joe heard that we were going live. He's like, nope, I don't want to be here. He went back to his room. But yeah, this is a really good flexible recipe. You can use herbs, you can use spices. Mustards are so varied nowadays. You can get all kinds of mustards. I want to say in one of the classes that I've done with Jack before in real life, I taught him how to make his own mustard. If I'm not mistaken, I think we had that class. Oh, we can't hear you, honey. Muted again.
The mustard recipe was awesome. And here's the best part. You can take like leftover beer and mustard seeds, and
yeah.
And
So
2 weeks later, you are rocking the most incredible mustard. And I realize the phrase leftover beer is not common in a lot of places, but
I mean, see, we say leftover beer because that sounds like the responsible thing to say. But what it sounds like is I had to make beer mustard, so now I got to drink beer.
yeah.
Leftover beer goes in your face, not in the mustard. But yeah, if you've never made your own mustard, you can buy mustard.
It is absolutely incredible to make your own mustard.
So good. And I can actually
so good.
I can include that recipe later if anybody wants it. But I mean, in the most basic sense, you take mustard seeds, you soak them in a liquid, and much like we're doing with this beer cheese, if you choose a beer, you get to amplify certain flavors in your mustard, and then you run it through a food processor, and you have something equivalent to a stone ground mustard, but with a little bit of a beer flavor. So I'm gonna bring y'all back down here. See if we can get a close up. My beer cheese is at a slight simmer. So that means the flour notes are cooking off. So I'm gonna add in the Worcestershire and the mustard. Give it a nice stir.
How much Worcestershire and how much mustard?
So it's 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire and then a teaspoon and a half of Dijon mustard if you got it.
Got it.
All right. So you've got that, and then I'm gonna bring over my cheese. It's one of the most important ingredients. Now, as is, right now, this is a beautiful sauce. It's a really nice, thickened, creamy beer sauce, really. And this would be good on a pasta. You could put this with seafood. You could just use this right now as is. But because we're making a fondue to dip all of our stuff in, we're gonna add cheese. And the key thing here is once we bring this back to a simmer, we're gonna put this on as low as we can go on our stove because we don't want it to burn on the bottom while we're mixing in our cheese. The longer it takes you is not a problem. If it takes you forever, that's fine. You don't want to try and rush the process and then ruin it because we've done all this really great work. So it's at a nice light simmer. It's bubbling all over. So I'm going to turn my heat down low. Really nicely. Then I'm going to put all of our grated cheese in and use my handy dandy awesome grater that just holds it all for me. I freaking love this thing. It's amazing. All right. And just so y'all are aware, the recipe ratios that I gave you guys is going to make about 2 to 3 cups of beer cheese, which is quite a bit. It's quite a bit. Like I know it didn't look like a whole lot in our pot right now, but we haven't added all the cheese. And I like to add my cheese in parts. So right now I've just added a handful of cheese. And that allows me to make sure it's all melting nicely. All right. And then once you can't see a whole bunch of strings, then we're going to add in a little more. Check this. So bringing this up to a higher temp so we can get those skewers searing. Now, if you have a fondue pot, this is wonderful, right? You can make it, put it in your fondue pot, and then hold that temperature at your table and it'll be great. If you don't have a fondue pot, there's a couple of weird little hacks you can do to try and keep it warm. One would be if you have a hot plate, like maybe you go camping, you could put it on a low setting and then put this on and off on the table as it starts to thicken and get hard. Because once this isn't on a direct heat source, it will definitely try and get super, super thick. And we want it to be dippy. See how nice that looks? Now, if you don't have a hot plate, one of my favorite cheats is if you happen to have a wife or somebody in your house that has one of those oil burners to make your house smell nice, just take the thing off the top that's supposed to smell nice and put your pot on top of that and don't tell anybody. That's another one. Or if you have none of the above, you can put this in a bowl over a really, really hot bowl of water or a hot pot of water. And that's a technique called a bain-marie. And that'll keep it nice and warm, but it won't be the same because the heat will be consistent. When the water cools down, you're going to have trouble keeping it warm. So you have a couple options. You just warm it back up or eat it faster. That's it. That's how it goes. And it'll store really well. If you happen to store this and then you go to reheat it in your microwave, you want to heat it in very small amounts. You want to do like 30 seconds, stir it around, 30 more seconds, stir it around. That way you don't burn the edges. All right, we're getting there. This is looking good, guys. So there's our pan. Our oil's nice and hot. We're going to go and hear that sizzle. Sexy, sexy sizzle. Oh, yeah. Beautiful. We've got this here. Oh, you've seen that? That's amazing. Let me bring it down a little bit more. Oh, yeah. Almost done. I want to say, I didn't count, but I think I made 5. I think I put the cheese in 5 parts. Might have been 4. But basically about a handful at a time. And then it'll allow you to stir it in and mix it. Now, once all your cheese is melted in, you are going to taste it because you can still add more paprika. You can add more spices. Maybe you want to add some ground black pepper. You can add a little more Worcestershire and mustard if you want. But the mustard and the Worcestershire are not to make it taste like those ingredients. It's just to enhance all the flavors that are in there. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's some sexy, sexy cheese. I know it sounds really funny, but like I see stuff like this and, you know, other people see hot liquids, maybe like hot waxes and stuff, and they think of a spa. If there's a spa that would let me just dip my body in cheese, please send that information to me. Somebody open a cheese spa. I'll be your best customer. Oh, it's beautiful. And I can feel the entire, I love whisks because they allow you to pretty much feel your pot without having your hand in it because they've got more parts than a spoon. So as I'm scraping, I can tell nothing's stuck. Everything's really smooth. So we've got some really nice blue cheese. So I'm going to pull this over to the side. We can put it back on here in a minute if we need to. And check. Look at that sear, guys. Beautiful. I'm going to rotate my skewers. Check up on our Facebook feed. I can remember how to do this. Got our beautiful little salty potatoes. I think Jack's on the same page, which is good. Right. While those are searing, bring y'all back over here to the main counter. Don't forget, it's the chef's beer. It's very important. You gotta keep feeding yourself. Cheers. Oh yeah, Good stuff. So, the one thing to keep in mind is if you are searing with dry herb rubs like that, the air in the kitchen gets really, really heavy. So if you have a fan, great opportunity to use it. So, put it away. We're going to get some beer cheese going. All right.
Chandler, you are rocking Corey's shorts. I gotta tell you.
I'm telling you, I'm so happy he let me use them. You know? It's very generous of him to let me use my outfit or his outfit for the dad stuff. All right, guys. Almost there. Hopefully you're cooking along. All right, so got our cheese. I'm gonna make a little serving portion right here. I already made a mess. That's okay because it's a very tasty mess. This cute little baby ladle. Put some cheese in there. And I'll tell y'all why I like to put this in a little pot here in a minute. Or a little bowl. Okay. A little messy. Clean up our plates. Presentation looks nice. Got these gorgeous cedar skewers, which these haven't rested yet. So by putting them on this plate and they rest, they'll probably release a little bit of juice, but that's totally fine. Tastes delicious. Then we have the little potatoes. This is a really good example of one that's got like the caked salt. As you can see right here, this line is caked and these other parts are film. So as is, I would serve it like that, but if this is a little too much salt, you can just pretty much brush them, kind of the way you clean mushrooms. Brush off some of that extra salt. Put a couple of those on there. We got tongs. Potatoes. Meat and potatoes. So meat and potatoes is one of those like classic combinations, right? You hear it all the time. Can't go wrong. I just love being able to find new ways to do it. Keep it interesting. You know, because you've got like pot roast, you've got steak and baked potatoes. Now you've got skewers, beer cheese, and salted or salt crusted potatoes. So that is pretty much our cooking class. As you can tell, we got all our good stuff. And now I like to do this in case people want to dip, but I don't dip. I'm going to take this pot of cheese and pour it all over stuff and just get a fork. Because I don't got time to individually dip all these potatoes. Okay, I'm going to just pour cheese all over these potatoes because I have no shame. Just like that. And I'm going to eat them later. Pour it right on these skewers. And then I'm going to drink a beer because I can. Because I'm a dad, and that's what dads do. So happy Father's Day to anybody out there watching. I hope you eat this cheesy, delicious mess and enjoy it. And I really look forward to hearing what you guys do and come up with. Jack, I can't wait to hear how yours turn out over there. I'm sure it'll turn out great. You're a great cook. But yeah, so for anybody else that's just kind of tuning in on Facebook, just so you know, next week our theme is bitters. And we will be cooking with bitters and drinking with bitters as our base, which will be very interesting. And I just do these classes, you know, to keep myself busy. If y'all have specific things you want to learn, whether it's in this format with me on Sundays, or if you want me to like program a class for you and do it on a different day of the week where you're in your house and it's just more of a one-on-one situation, feel free to let me know. I do that as well. But right now, I'm gonna get busy, eat some cheese and some meat and potatoes and drink some more beer. So I'm gonna turn off the live stream on Facebook. Hope everyone out there is having a happy Father's Day. Javier, if you're watching, te quiero mucho, feliz día del padre. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'll see y'all later.